The phone showed 29 missed calls from an Illinois area code I didn't recognize, which meant a new number, which meant someone had gone to some trouble. I sat at the kitchen counter with my coffee going cold in front of me, and the phone face up between my palms and Fig pressed against my left ankle, the way he always did when something in the room had shifted. He was a rescue with one slightly damaged ear that never fully straightened and a sensitivity to tension that had made the adoption coordinator warn us, gently, that he might be better with a quieter household. We had taken him anyway. I thought I knew something about calibrated watchfulness. Joel had already left for the office. His coffee cup was in the sink, rinsed. There was fog on the kitchen window, the particular blue-gray Portland fog that I had spent 12 years learning to find beautiful instead of oppressive. And I sat there listening to the silence and already knowing, with the flat certainty of someone who has trained themselves to read the room from the doorway, what the calls were about. I built things for a living, or I rebuilt them, took the identities of companies and organizations that had drifted or lied or simply stopped being legible, and helped them tell the truth about what they actually were. I had a studio on Burnside, 3 employees I trusted, a reputation that had taken the better part of a decade to earn. I had chosen the work deliberately. I knew what I was choosing it for. My name was Petra Rowland. It had not always been. The pattern started early enough that I don't have a memory of a time before it. What I have instead are 2 clean moments, extracted from the longer blur, which I return to when I need to understand how they operated. I was 8 years old in a mall in Harwick, which is a mid-sized town in Illinois that cares about its reputation the way insecure people care about their clothes. My mother told me to wait by the fountain while she and my father went to look at something 2 stores down. She said 5 minutes. 20 minutes passed. I counted them on the mall clock above the food court, and when they finally came back, she said, "You waited. Good. You need to learn patience." Patricia Lutz, who at 41 still had the kind of looks that made people assume she was kind, set her hand briefly on my hair and smiled at my father over my head. I did not know what passed between them. I knew that I had been afraid and that my fear had been the point. I was 10 years old in a parking lot outside a grocery store when my father locked the car doors with me inside and walked away to stand 50 feet across the lot and watch me. It was mid-July. The windows fogged. I did not cry. I had already learned that crying in front of them produced a specific look, amused, satisfied, that was worse than the fear itself. After 7 minutes, he came back and said, "If a stranger had come, you would have been helpless. I want you to know that. I want you to feel what that feels like." I felt it. That was not the lesson they thought they were teaching. Everything was a test. The tests were always ones I could not be told about because the fear was the curriculum. I understood, with the animal understanding of a child in an unsafe house, that they believed this sincerely, believed that discomfort was the same as growth, that cruelty issued from love could be metabolized as love. I do not think they knew they were sadistic. I think they were people who had found a consistent source of pleasure and named it parenting. I was 12 in the spring when I brought home a report card with a B+ in social studies. I did not hear the kitchen conversation directly. I heard it from the hallway, the way you hear everything important in a house where you have learned to be quiet, my mother's voice low, amused, a register she reserved for things she found diverting. My father's voice responding, the specific inflection of a bet being proposed and accepted. I didn't catch every word. I caught enough. The next morning they were cheerful in the particular way that had always made my body alert before my mind caught up. My father made pancakes. My mother asked about my week with the bright, attentive expression she used when she was paying close attention to something other than the conversation. We were going to Chicago, they said. They had some business, and they thought I might enjoy seeing Union Station. I sat in the back seat of the car and watched the Illinois flatlands go past and felt the low hum of wrongness in my chest that I had no words for. I was 12. I had spent 12 years inside their logic. I thought, maybe this is fine. Maybe the feeling is wrong. I had been taught to mistrust my own readings. Union Station in Chicago is one of those buildings that makes you understand why people built things like that. The main hall with its high coffered ceiling, the marble floors, the light coming down from the clear-story windows in wide, pale columns. The smell of it, diesel and stone and coffee, and the particular damp warmth of a place where a lot of people have passed through. My parents walked me in through the south entrance, and I turned in a slow circle looking up at the ceiling, and for a moment forgot to be watchful. When I turned back, they were gone. I don't know how long I stood there. I know that at first I thought they had simply moved, gone to find a coffee, stepped to look at something. I know there was a pillar near the center of the hall with a clock above it that I positioned myself beside because I needed to be findable. The minute hand moved. The foot traffic moved around me in the incurious way of commuters. A woman with a rolling suitcase nearly clipped my shoulder without looking. I was 12 years old and very small, and it was a Tuesday in April in Chicago, and I was beginning to understand what was happening the way you understand a thing you have been avoiding. All at once, and then with complete, terrible clarity. The car was at the window. I saw it through the glass, street level, my father's profile. My mother on the passenger side, her window cracked, saying something with her face turned toward the station. My father turned his head, and his eyes met mine through the window and through the glass wall of the station. I will not pretend I'm certain he saw me, but I believe he did. I believe it in the way I believe things I cannot unknow, and he raised his thumb. A thumbs up. The cheerful, conclusive gesture of a man who has made a bet and is recording its terms. My mother's arm came out the window. She had something in her hand, I could not see what, and she said something that the glass and the distance took from me, but that I knew, with the same flat animal certainty that had been my survival equipment for 12 years, was the terms of the wager being formalized, whether I could find my own way home. The car pulled into traffic. I stood at the pillar for a long time after that. I don't know how long. I am aware, in retrospect, that I was in shock, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet interior kind, the kind that looks from the outside like a child standing very still beside a clock. The woman who found me was in her 50s, wearing the uniform of the station's operations staff, and she had the practical, unhurried manner of someone who has handled difficult situations by approaching them without ceremony. She actually crouched, coming down to my eye level, and she asked me if I was all right. I said yes. She said, "I've been watching you stand here for a while," and her voice was neither alarmed nor performing concern, just accurate, and something about the accuracy of it broke through. I said I think my parents left. She said, okay. Her name was Cynthia. She said, "Are you hungry?" The way you ask a child a practical question when the real question is too large. I said no and then started crying, which was the first time I had cried in front of an adult in approximately 4 years. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You are safe and I am going to help you," and those 9 words were the most straightforward thing any adult had ever said to me. The rest of that part of the story is compressed in my memory the way administrative events compress police, a social services office with fluorescent lighting, a phone call I was not present for. My parents, when reached, did not come. They cited the distance, and then other things I was not told, and then a conversation happened at the level of adults and courts and paperwork in which I was present only as the subject. What I learned, years later, was that they had been given the option to attend a parenting course and regain custody, and that they had chosen not to. I want to be careful about how I describe that choice, because there is a way of describing it that makes them into monsters, and the truth is more banal than that. They made a calculation. The calculation concluded that the inconvenience outweighed the interest. That was not a conclusion about the courses. It was a conclusion about me, and it was the most honest thing they ever told me. I was placed with Dennis and Carol Rowland when I was 13, after 8 months in 2 different foster situations that I don't need to detail here, except to say that the Rowland house, when I arrived at it in November, had a lamp on in the entryway and smelled like something cooking. Carol asked me, that first night, if I needed the hall light on. Not assuming. Asking. I said yes. The hall light was on for 2 years until I said it wasn't necessary anymore. That is the whole of what I mean when I say they were good at it. I chose the name Petra from a book Carol had on her shelf, a travel book about Rome, a chapter on the ancient city of Petra in Jordan, a place that had been carved out of rose-colored stone and survived the centuries by being harder than the things that tried to erase it. I chose Rowland because it was theirs, and I wanted something of theirs that I could carry. Dennis cried when I told him. He turned away to do it, the way a man of his generation turns away, and then turned back and said, "Well, that's settled then," in the voice of someone for whom it had been settled long before I asked. The Art Institute of Chicago, which is where I went for undergrad before transferring west, contains a painting I used to sit in front of for long periods. A hopper, the light in it so specifically American and specifically lonely, and also, in some way I couldn't fully articulate, comforting. I spent a lot of time in the 80s and 90s galleries in those years, learning to be someone who could trust her own perception. Portland came after. The studio came after that. Joel I met at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend who had predicted, correctly, that we would either talk for 4 hours or have nothing to say to each other. We talked for 4 hours. On our fourth date, I told him the train station story, which I had told exactly 3 people before him: Carol, a therapist, and a college roommate who had shown up to a crisis at 3 in the morning and earned it. Joel listened to the whole thing. He took my hand when I was done and said, quietly, "That should never have happened to you," not trying to fix it, not asking questions, just nomming it accurately, the way accurate nomming is the closest you can get, sometimes, to repair. I had blocked the Lutz on every platform I had ever used. I had not sent a Christmas card or a birthday acknowledgement or a reply to the single letter, forwarded by a cousin, years ago, that had arrived with Patricia Lutz's return address in the upper left corner. I had not opened the letter. I knew what was in it without opening it, the same way I had known what the long drive to Chicago was for, and I had put it in a drawer and then moved it to a box, and then moved the box into a storage unit, and then let the storage unit lapse. I was very good at managing distance. I had to be. The voicemail was from someone I had not spoken to in 21 years. My sister Cassie was 4 years younger than me, which had made her 8 when I left, old enough to have a coherent version of events, young enough that those events had been shaped, for years, by people who had reasons to shape them. She had found me through a combination of social media, my studio's website, and a mutual connection I didn't know we had. Her voice on the message sounded older than I expected, and also, in the careful way she chose her words, more honest. She said she was not calling for them. She said she had become a mother 14 months ago and had gone looking for the court records after that because she needed, she said, to know what was real. She said she knew what she'd found, and she was sorry she had taken this long to say so. She said she was not asking me to do anything. And then she said our parents were in bad shape. Dale had a stroke the previous winter. Patricia's health wasn't good. The stores had closed after a Facebook comment from a former employee opened a door that several other people had walked through, and the town's opinion of them had adjusted accordingly, and that they had asked, through Cassie, whether I might come. She said she wasn't advocating for that. She was just relaying. I sat with the voicemail for 2 days before I called her back. The conversation was 40 minutes long, and I will keep most of it private except to say that she was nothing like what I had half expected, and that talking to her felt like finding a letter you'd assumed was lost. She asked very little. She listened well. When I said I wasn't sure why I would go, she said she understood that, and she did not press. Joel, when I told him, said, "You don't owe them anything. You know that." And then he said, "But if you need to go for your own reasons, I'll drive you to the airport." That was the whole of the conversation, which is one of the reasons I married him. Carol said over the phone that she loved me and that whatever I decided she would be here when I got back. I wrote that down. I don't usually write things down. I went. The hospital outside Harwick is the kind of regional facility that smells of industrial disinfectant and the specific managed fear of a place where people come to have their bodies addressed by strangers. Dale was in a bed by the window, diminished in the way a stroke diminishes, the left side of his face slightly reorganized, one arm moved less than the other. He looked smaller. I had expected to feel something about that. I noticed that I didn't particularly. Patricia was in the chair beside him, and she had arranged her expression with the same careful attention I recognized from my childhood, the performance of feeling calibrated for her audience. She started crying before I had fully entered the room. The tears were real in the technical sense. They arrived on schedule. She said my old name. I said it's Petra. She said it again, And I said, once more with the same flat tone, "It's Petra." And then I sat in the chair across from them, and the room was quiet except for the sound of the building's ventilation system. Dale said my name, the right one, and then said, "We've thought about you a lot." I said, "I know you probably have." I didn't say it as a comfort. Patricia said they wanted me to know they were sorry, and that they had been young, and that they'd made mistakes, and that they had suffered for them. The word mistakes arrived in the sentence with a specific weight, the weight of a word chosen for its ambiguity. A mistake is missing an exit on the highway. A mistake is putting the wrong date on a check. I looked at her and I said, "What you did was deliberate. You planned it. You made a bet about it." "I know because I heard you, and because a thumbs up through a car window is not a mistake." Dale made a sound. Patricia's face shifted through several configurations. I said, "I'm not here to tell you what you are. I'm here because I needed to say this in person, in the room, while you could hear it." I had carried one sentence for 21 years, not composed it dramatically. It had simply been there, appearing in various forms over the years of therapy and night waking and quiet mornings in the Portland studio when I was working, and the thought surfaced unbidden. I said it without raising my voice, in the middle of what I was saying, not at the end. "You bet on whether I could find my own way home. I did. I just didn't come back to yours." Dale asked if this was goodbye. I said yes. Patricia said, "Please," and then said something else that I did not stay to hear completely, because I was already standing. I did not slam the door. I pulled it shut behind me with the careful click of someone who has finished with a room. My hands were shaking in the parking lot, not from grief. There's a physical release that comes from saying the true thing in the true place, and it expresses itself, sometimes, in the hands. I sat on a low concrete barrier near the entrance and let them shake and thought about nothing in particular for a few minutes. The Illinois sky was flat and pale. A man in scrubs walked past me without looking. The air smelled like thaw and car exhaust. I had thought in the months leading up to going that seeing them diminished would feel like something, resolution, or satisfaction, or some composite emotion I didn't have a name for. It felt like none of those things. It felt like arriving at a site you have read about extensively and finding that it is precisely the size you were told it was. No larger, no smaller. Not the haunting, exactly. The haunting's shape. I flew home the next morning. Joel picked me up from the airport. Fig was in the back seat, standing up and pressing his nose to the car window the way he always did. We drove back to the house through the late afternoon light, and I sat in the kitchen with a new cup of coffee and didn't say much. And Joel made dinner and put music on at low volume, and Fig slept on my feet. I think about the girl at the pillar sometimes. I have thought about her for 21 years, and for most of those years there was grief attached to the thought, not constant, not debilitating, but present, a frequency the thought arrived on. What I noticed, in the weeks after the hospital, was that the frequency had changed. She was still there, 12 years old and very still, positioned by the clock in the main hall of Union Station, learning something about herself and about the world that no child should have to learn in that particular way. But I could think about her clearly. I could look at her directly. She was not unwanted by the world. She was unwanted by two people who had mistaken cruelty for strength and a bet for a lesson. That is not the same thing. It is a very different thing. She found Cynthia and the Rowlands and Portland and Joel and Fig and a studio where she helped other people tell the truth. She found a name that fit. She found, eventually, the voice to say in a hospital room what she had needed to say. And she found the door, and she walked through it, and she pulled it shut behind her. That girl at the pillar found her way home. She just didn't go back to theirs.